Hello everyone. So I'll straight get to the chat around the industry. So Dr. Velumani, as we were discussing earlier as well, as the industry, the traditional diagnostic industry as we know it, has historically grown at 20% plus, and the whole unorganized to organized shift playing out. Has that piece sort of played out already to a large extent in tier 1 cities? And, as a lot of private equity money comes in backing even the smaller diagnostic players in big cities, competitive intensity has sort of gone up, and we see some realization pressures also coming in. Is there any new technology, any disruption, any new avenue of growth, be it on the government side of things, be it on the molecular diagnostic side of things, that can sort of be the next front of growth here?
Right. Diagnostics industry has been a subject of keen interest for investors for the last 10 years. In an industry where truly capex is not needed and a lot of profits are there, plenty of private equity participation has taken place, and we have now 2 listed companies and a third is on the runway. And these 2 listed companies were getting a much higher valuation at the time of their IPO, surprising to even the players. But then market corrects itself. Today we are trading at same rate at which we got listed 2 years back. That means there is a correction. And having said that, even in a corrected PE multiple, it's pretty high. And that makes many people to invest in small and medium players. To my knowledge, around 100 players have been funded in this country using around $250 million US. All these players have been told very clearly, we want numbers and numbers. So there is a huge, what you call as bloodbath, and everybody thinks that cutting the price is the only way to grow. And it worked well for me 20 years back because pricings were very high. Today, in the disrupted pricing, cutting the pricing somewhere is only putting the runway cost too high. And plenty of them have given up, according to me. So if you ask me, there is no change in model. Earlier, a lot of B2C model. B2C models find difficult to get volume. B2B model gets volume. But B2B model doesn't have margins. So I think, literally speaking, everyone tries to invest some money and see what is the traction. They reach to around 2,000 samples per day. Things appear to be working. Anything beyond 2,000 samples per day is not working. And some of them have come back to 1,000 samples per day because there at least you make some margin. Technology-wise, nothing much has happened in these last 10 years. Some molecules have helped. Vitamin D was a molecule for the last 10 years for the laboratories, as well as even for our vendors. And some of the molecules have come in the picture, but not as promising as vitamin D. We all will have to wait if there is anything which helps us to grow maybe additional 5-10%. As you said, unorganized market was supposed to have given up in these last 10 years of onslaught by the organized players. But I think there is profit in this diagnostics, either too high volume or in too low volume. And the low volume guys are stuck with 500 to 1,000 samples, and they are very much going to be there. So if you ask me, like Indian politics, national players will be there, regional players will be there.
So as the industry moves a little bit to the tier 2, tier 3 markets, starts going there, right? As tier 1 is already reasonably penetrated. Do you see the B2B model playing out sort of in a bigger capacity, or do you see the B2C model playing out in the smaller markets? What do you think? Your model has worked well in the tier 2 markets where you have been able to draw samples out from even the smaller cities, etc., with your central lab. But do you see that playing out even more succinctly going forward with other players also moving to a similar model? Or do you think the way forward there is going to be the retail mode?
Nothing very clear which one will be truly ideal to approach. In a B2C model, there is value, there is profit, but there is no volume. And in B2B, it is a lot of volume, very little margins, so there is a challenge there. So the guys who are in B2C think the other bank is green, so they move towards B2B. And the guys who are in B2B will think that there is a value, so let us move that way. And let me honestly tell you, as on today, the guys who run laboratories hardly make money. The guys who run collection centers make a lot of money. Because they are the guys in touch with the customer, and there is 50-60% margins are given to them because of the greed for volume. And that has given the control in their hand. And that is another industry which is likely to come up, like what you call as an unbranded ATM. There could be even unbranded collection centers across the country who will collect for anyone. And that is another very interesting business model, which I think is likely to succeed. Because every player cannot have his own ATM. But if there is an ATM, probably every player can use it.
So as we talk about the new dimensions, etc., molecular diagnostics, genomics, etc., that has emerged as a new wave, sort of, in new diagnostics. I think the traditional diagnostics players have still not sort of gone deep into that. But Anu, just to hear from you, what's the size, opportunity size there? How do you see that industry playing out in the near term, and then obviously in the long term basis, what has also happened in the developed markets?
Sure. So if you look at genomics and other such newer technologies that are coming up, they can be used in multiple different areas, whether it's in screening, whether it's in diagnosis, or even therapy management. Now, I think the good and the bad thing about genomics so far has been the fact that the prices have been coming down of the reagent itself. So there is a possibility, which was one of the limiting factors today for most people using these techniques. Across the world, I think what we have started seeing is that there has been a much more increased adoption of these technologies, primarily in whether it's in disease areas like oncology or neurology, but also in areas, in fun things like Ancestry and knowing things about yourself. So I think there has been a huge adoption, and it is only going to increase further, because I think mainly the limitation factors were accessibility and the price point, both of which are coming down tremendously. So what was few $1 billion is coming down to $100. So you can imagine that the effect that the transistor had on our daily telecom and other things, that same sort of disruption can happen in medicine, in genomics, in healthcare. So I think that's the way I look at it, that we haven't yet seen that huge deluge yet, because we are not yet at that price point. But I think in the 5 years that we've been in the market, our prices also have dropped fairly significantly. So I would say in the next 2-3 years, we'll start seeing a much more we'll start seeing a lot more adoption of this as the awareness of the consumer increases, but also as the awareness amongst the medical professionals increase.
And where do you see the adoption first picking up from? So would it be within the larger setups, like a ThyroCare or a Dr. Lal's or something of that sort, or because they already have the footprint, right, to go B2C, or you see this to play out in a more B2B fashion in the near term, and then sort of it finds its way as the price drops further?
See, I think the problem with many of the pathology labs is that they are very content with the business they get. So this is not something that is driving their business today. I think it has to, currently we are seeing a lot of growth coming direct, but also we do work with a lot of B2B players as well. So while there is a distribution channel, I think the teams that are actually going out there to consumers are not the same kind that you would need to develop this. there are other channels that are more likely to pick this up faster. So I think there is, because this is a very different kind of a sale, there is possibility that you would need someone who understands technology better. You need doctors who understand this space better. So I think the way we've seen it evolve has been, there are certain types of doctors, for instance, who will pick this up faster. But in the next 5 years, as the next set of medical professionals come on board, I think we'll start seeing that there will be a definite increase. But I think the real push will be through insurance, through pharmaceutical, and through other such areas.
Would this, as preventive diagnostics catches up and becomes the more sort of, the bigger part of growth, as we see in the traditional diagnostic businesses as well, would this not fit perfectly well into that piece of growth for the traditional diagnostics? Or as you plan out a retail sort of, or a B2C model, or the price points are still prohibitive to sort of play it on a larger scale?
No, I think B2C will works for a certain extent. Only the problem is in terms of getting to the right volumes right now. B2B, so we'll continue to work with the path labs to get some of the volumes, but I think ultimately the real volumes won't come from the path labs. That's my take on it.
What do you think on the regulatory side needs to change, like on the payer side, on the regulation side? What is it that can sort of help you going forward? There is enough regulatory push now in healthcare. So where do you see that helping you?
So I think, if they start paying for outcomes, I think that's where molecular diagnosis will really help. Because if, let's say, you're paid for keeping a patient well, like they're trying to do in the US, I think then the need for technology increases further. The second thing is, if you want to understand that prevention is going to be much more cost effective than treatment, I think then you'll start seeing that. So I think from a regulatory perspective, I think we are looking at a lot of price control happening, whether it's in stents and other things, which is later on in life. If we can start seeing that doctors start getting paid for actually keeping patients well, I think you will see a different, completely different way of how they will start looking at technology, because they might, if they get paid for that better, I think it'll be far superior. The second thing is, I think if insurance industry matures in India, I think you'll see that, a lot of growth in the other markets have been driven through that. And that hasn't happened in India. The third thing is, I think from a regulatory perspective, we haven't seen that much emphasis on preventive right now, even though in India our budgets are fairly low. I think our budgets are so low that, even with all the grant plans that we might have, we might not be able to actually implement some of those. So if the focus becomes early stage, I think even for the governments, even for everybody else, I think it becomes a far more convincing argument that you should invest more over there. But from a regulatory perspective, I think we'll have to look at a lot of models outside of India to be able to get to the right kind of model that will work for us.
So, as we see a regulatory overhang on prices for testing, maybe it starts inside hospitals first and moves out later. But if, for example, there is some price control, would it be best in that case to stay B2B rather than go B2C? And maybe...
Yeah. The price control will affect the hospitals more than these standalone diagnostic players. Hospitals have got some kind of a comfort of in-house patients, and that limits the counts. And to make it viable, they have kept higher pricing. Whereas commercial players all have fought in the street and they have all disrupted their own pricing. So when a price control comes, a hospital will have challenges because they don't have volume. And if there is a control, they can't operate it internally. They may have to outsource, which is most likely to happen. Having said that, I have not done pathology. I have not done microbiology. I have done only biochemistry. So I believe that is the strength of today's diagnosis business. Don't do everything, if possible. I don't do what Anu does, and she doesn't do what I do. So if you notice it, literally speaking, the one who focuses is making a very powerful journey. I do radiology. There also I don't do ultrasound, MRI or CT. I only do PET CT. And in PET CT, when I am focusing, the machine is having a capability of doing almost 40 scans per machine per day. Currently, there are only 5 scans per machine per day is done. It is almost like everybody is running a private jet. They are not running a commercial airline. So I think I have been telling in various forums, standing machine is a liability. Running machine is an asset. So have machines and keep running them. So that gives a necessity to disrupt the price and make sure the machine runs. The irony in today's pathology industry is the guys who charge more makes less profit. The guys who charge least make most profit. So that's a volume game there. And I believe that it should be playing in. Coming to price control, it will affect many people who have felt that my customer is rich, so they can pay me.
So, Dr. Velumani, do you in the near, maybe not in the near-term future, but in the longer-term, see opportunities to acquire businesses in the genomic space, in the molecular diagnostic space, as this, one, it adds to the menu, two, it is at a higher price point. So, as you see, price realization growth challenges in the industry, do you think that can add, mitigate some of the realization growth issues? And as the volume piece catches on in that part of the business, would that be a good inorganic opportunity to look at?
Now, the current 4 or 5 years have made inorganic acquisitions very costly. Earlier, no one knew what is their value, including me. And then now they are all listed, we know what is multiple all about. So any guy who go and talk, he tells, if you get that multiple, why don't you give me that multiple? So it's going to be tough unless otherwise like Dr. G.S.K. Velu, who has got deep pockets and could go ahead and acquire a fairly good number of laboratories. Well, inorganic has its own cost. Probably it helps you to build a size much faster. It all depends upon how you want to journey. I had not in last 23 years done any inorganic acquisition. I don't think I will be doing that. And even if I do that way, it will fit in what kind of integration challenges are there. Is it worth doing in a laboratory business is still a big question. Though all of us are having cash in our balance sheet, today I'm doing a buyback instead of doing an inorganic because it appears that inorganic is not that simple. But having said that, let 1, 2, 3, 4 guys remain in the industry without any inorganic acquisition. 6, 7, 8, 9, if they get together, they can even become number 2 or number 3. So there appears to be some necessity. I think regional players should get together. I think the investors who are sitting here must coolly go and purchase some 10 regional laboratories without any knowledge what are you going to do, and then make it as a single brand and get into multiples which are very attractive. I think if you are in a regional operator, multiples are only 10 or 15. You are a national operator, multiples are 20 or 25, even 30. So I think the game is to get size, and the investor's job it is. Laboratory people will not understand, will be scared, and will be not truly going for it. This is my personal opinion.
So, last question, Dr. Velumani. How do you see the PPP business playing out in the diagnostic industry? It's caught on in the last 4 or 5 years. Lots of players have sort of built scale just on that model. How do you see it, one, playing out for yourself, playing out for the industry? There is a perception in the investor community it's not sticky enough, right? So the valuation multiples are not what, players continue to ask the same multiples that the non-PPP or the B2C businesses will command. But how do you see that business play out in terms of stickiness, in terms of strength of the margin profile of that business?
I think pathology doesn't need any PPP because it is low capex and anybody can get inside as long as they give business. You can sit and operate there. So pathology is much simpler. I think the 3 areas where we have challenges is CT, MRI, PET CT. I think government has come up in various state governments have come up with PPP for CT and MRI. I'm told it's working very well. Only thing, cash comes very, very, very late. So that's the biggest challenge. And Indian healthcare is not a central government's domain. It's a state government's domain. There are too many challenges in understanding the nuances and getting it. But I believe that CT, MRI, PET CT would be certainly benefited out of PPP. And once you have got the in-house patients off the hospital, your business becomes profitable and viable. And you don't have to pay that so-called referral fees to get that patient because they're in-house patients. So I think PPP will rule. PPP will be, government should only promise and pay that dues in time. That is the only fear probably many have got when they get into PPP.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Velamanu. Thank you so much, Anu.